Hey everyone, Reaper here again with another video. This is just another discussion video. I'm just curious about what keeps you in the comic book hobby. What is it about collecting comics that's important to you, that resonates with you, that's meaningful to you? I'll talk a little bit about those things when it comes to me while showing off. I just took out a lot of different books to show, so it's just not me speaking. You see a little bit of eye candy as we go through this. So, what is it about the hobby that really resonates with you, that brings you in it, that keeps you in it? Well, I could talk about what keeps me in it. I've always liked to collect things. You know, if you watch some of my earlier videos, I've dedicated videos to this. I used to like to collect cards, comic book cards. I was never into sports cards or anything like that. I was never into sports, believe it or not. No, I couldn't care less about sports or sports cards. As a kid, a lot of people, a lot of kids my age were into that sort of stuff. They were usually talking about the Yankees. And although I came from a Yankee household, I never really liked the Yankees that much, or sport. I should take that back. Not that I didn't like the Yankees, I didn't like sports. My best friend, Joe, was a big-time Mets fan, so I never heard anything good about the Yankees with him around. But I was never into sports, so I gravitated towards more creative things. Fantasy things. I liked fantasy movies like The Dark Crystal. I grew up with that. I enjoyed Star Wars. I liked Star Trek and so forth and so on. Star Trek was something that had to grow on me over the, earlier. I've always liked it, but when I was younger, I preferred Star Wars more than Star Trek. But I liked that sort of stuff, and when I was introduced to Marvel trading cards and I saw who the Marvel characters were, I learned more about them. I knew more about the DC characters, like this one right here, the Green Lantern, than Marvel. And then, a bunch of other things. As I mentioned before, I started collecting comics, and it was great. I enjoyed seeing these characters drawn and seeing the adventures that they would go on. And I think with a lot of people, I think sometimes some of these characters you would identify with. Like I know a lot of people today, a lot of younger kids today, might identify with Miles Morales. Or may identify with Kamala Khan. Or some other characters. Well, for me, I like to think I connected with Peter Parker when I first started reading Spider-Man, or I connected with Cyclops and so forth. Now, naturally, I didn't have optic blasts, or I couldn't crawl on walls or anything like that. But just sometimes, if you felt like you were pretty much an outcast for some of the things that you liked, or didn't really have anything else in common with other people, seeing similarities in some superheroes that you liked would make you feel like you're part of something that maybe you weren't getting in real life. And that was one of the appeals I thought about comics. Naturally, I liked the artwork and all that. At first, I know I'm probably going to offend some people, but what else is new? I wasn't a big fan of Jack Kirby back when I first started reading comics. I was into, I hate to say it, but no, I don't hate to say it. I liked Rob Liefeld. I know he gets a lot of shit, but let's face it, he brought a lot of people into the hobby with his artwork. Granted, there are things that you could criticize about him and his artwork. Well, you could criticize a lot of people. But I liked Rob Liefeld. I liked Todd McFarlane a lot. So those were the artists that I liked. So seeing their artwork back when I first got into the hobby in the early 90s is part of why I continued to collect. I got into Spawn and all the Image comics that were coming out, and I still collected Marvel comics and a little bit of DC. So I like that. I'm going to show a couple of slabs now. But as we fast forward to today, those are some of my younger reasons why I continued to collect. I like the idea of having books of value. I think sometimes that's a taboo with some collectors, not flippers. Flippers, people looking to buy books and sell them, they're all about that, and that's great. And some, collectors like to do that too, so they could fund bigger books or other things in their lives. That's all. We all collect for different reasons. But I do like the idea of having things that are somewhat valuable. It's almost, hey, this is pretty cool to have, and it's worth something. Something maybe you could cash out on and get a decent amount if you chose wisely. So we don't always all choose wisely, but that's pretty cool. That's definitely one of the big appeals for today. And maybe even back then, when I was a kid collecting, I was like, hey, maybe this will be worth something in the future. You always hear that. Oh, maybe these cards would be worth something. Or maybe these action figures would be worth something. And maybe these comic books would be worth something. And in some cases, those things are worth something or will be worth something. So the appeal of that was definitely there back then as it is today. But, I'll tell you though, seeing these things up on the movie screen and so forth, seeing some of the stories or some of the things that were based off of the stories that you read as a kid up on the movie screen or on the TV screen really brings you back and makes you almost feel like, hey, maybe this wasn't the biggest thing to be a part of back then. Because, when you were a comic book collector and so forth and so on back in the early 90s, 80s, before that, it wasn't necessarily perceived as the cool in thing, a lot of people were not into that. Sure, there were a lot of people that were, but sometimes the connection between you and those people wasn't there. So seeing that today, that these characters are up on the screen today, and remembering when you first started collecting and maybe some of the shit that you were given for collecting these things or liking these characters or wearing that Iron Man shirt, it almost seems like, haha, turns out that I was right. It was a pretty cool thing. It's part of it, I guess. I remember this, when I got this, I remember I told the story I got this cheap and I just left it out for the longest time, not really realizing what it was, that it was actually the first appearance of Vision. This is back years ago, not recently. And I kept looking at it and I'm like, is this the first appearance of Vision? It says behold the Vision, so maybe it is. It turned out it was. My copy's a 5.0. It's not a high grade copy, But talking a little bit more about why I'm into it today, other than, back in the day I liked it for this reason, that reason, maybe because they're worth something. I'll tell you, and I think a lot of people can maybe identify with me on this. There's nothing like trying to fill in some gaps to your collection, for those of us that are collectors, or trying to get those books that you've always wanted for years and you were finally able to get because maybe your financial situation has changed for various reasons. Maybe you got a great job, or maybe you were able to sell off books that you've had for years and finally get rid of the ones that you no longer want and get the ones you really want. There's nothing like being able to do that. Sometimes maybe the new collectors don't feel that as much because they just were maybe in the hobby for only a few years and so forth. But for those of us that have been in the hobby for a while that could not get some of the bigger issues, that are now finally able to get them in whatever grade, there's a certain feeling of like, wow, this, whenever you get something new, you get that feeling of feeling good and you feel it. And there's a bit of a high, I guess what I'm saying, is to getting some of these. Now, sometimes that could be a bad thing. You get too crazy with buying stuff and get yourself into a bad situation. But if you're not one of those people, if you're one of those people that buys, carefully, intelligently, and when you still get those books that you've always wanted, there's a certain feel of like, wow, this is really cool. I remember Nick one time said that there are times when he just gets a bunch of books out and just looks at them. I do the same thing, and I think a lot of us do. We look at them, our eyes don't not necessarily turn to dollar signs, but you look at them like, wow, this is really cool. It's like, for instance, this one. It's a great cover by Neil Adams. It's the first appearance of Man Bat. It's a desirable book, but it's just a great cover. The way Neil Adams would draw the characters and the colors and all that stuff. I love yellow and blue backgrounds. I love red backgrounds. It's just something that pops for me. Another great Neil Adams book right here. Look at this. Swipe of Detective 31. One of the best known covers of all time in comic books, right? But there is that satisfaction, just like relaxing, knowing that a book is coming that you really wanted, or that you want, or that you've been chasing for so many years, but you could never find it at the right price, and finally was able to, and it's going to be in your possession. it's not one of those things that, yeah, granted, a lot of us, you put them back in boxes, right? When you get them, you put them in boxes. Well, where else you got to put them? You have to throw them on the floor, put them in the sunlight, whatever. You put them in boxes and more or less they stay there. But, you could always go back. Or before they go in those boxes, you get a book that you really wanted, like this one right here. Amazing Spider-Man. I have a story for every one of these books. I just want to talk about them. We'd be here forever. But this one right here, back in 1996, I was trying to get a couple more Amazing Spider-Man books, and I did, with Amazing Spider-Man 4, Amazing Spider-Man 20. But this was one of them, sandwiched in between, and I almost got it, but somehow the deal fell through. Always wanted to get the first appearance of the Lizard, and I didn't get this until recently. It was just one of those things that I always put off, like, I'll eventually get it, and I finally did. And when I got it, it came from a collection. It also has a story, not just the story that I just told you about how I always wanted it and I almost got it, but it came from a collection that my local comic book shop owner bought that I went with him and helped grade some of the books. It came from a collector that he and his wife were collecting since the 1970s. So this book has a story beyond the first appearance of the Lizard. It's been in a collection since the 1970s, and for the first time since the late 70s, early 80s, I think, for the first time since that time, decades ago, it changed hands, and now it's with me for wherever, how long, So I think that's pretty cool. I like the history of things too. Here's another book I bought back in like 94 or 93 or whatever. It's a 3.0 copy, but it still looks pretty cool. And it's been with me ever since. So I think those are the reasons why that's what brought me in, keeps me in the hobby, why I'm in the hobby, why I continue to stay in the hobby. There's obviously financial reasons. There's a little bit of nostalgia. And there's just the overall joy of having these books. Hey, these are things from back then that you have with you today that you can preserve and that you could look at and that you could admire whenever you want. Let me know in the comments what keeps you in the hobby. What are some of the things that really appeals to you about this hobby? Take care.